I do think Harry and his father are trying to reconcile. I think with William, it's going to be a much longer process, but eventually, maybe, lots of families have disputes, and over time, they can heal their divisions. But there's a big job to be done yet with William. The King, I think, is open to reconciliation, but I don't. You may disagree, but I don't think he's open to the idea that Harry could be a sort of part-time working royal. I think they drew a line in the sand at Sandringham all those years ago now, where they essentially said you can't be a part-time working royal. You're either in or you're out. But it's been upsetting, I think, for quite a lot of journalists to see how the whole royal scene has become bitterly divided and quite toxic. And, to be accused of racism has been really upsetting for a lot of journalists, I think, by Harry and Meghan's supporters. I used to love dealing with him. He was a lovely guy, very funny. Loved the fact that he wore his heart on his sleeve. You could talk. You could have a chat with him. I mean, I can remember a bit of banter with him in the Caribbean in 2016 when he'd arrived early to be greeted by the Prime Minister of a particular island, Caribbean island we were visiting. And so came over to talk to us in the press who were there, introduced himself to a female reporter from one of the British papers who wasn't a normal royal correspondent, then started joking at my expense about, oh, you haven't been up all night drinking like Richard Palmer then.
Had you been up drinking all night?
I hadn't.
Right,
and I told him, how very dare you. How very dare you. But I loved all of that. And there was a colleague on another paper. He remembers it slightly differently, but the way I remember it, Harry sidling up to him saying, I see you're still writing, well, nonsense. Nonsense wasn't the word he used, but you could deal with all of that. Yeah. But also, I can remember going to Colorado to cover him visiting the Warrior Games, which was really the prototype for the Invictus Games, and we had a press reception where he was essentially saying to us, I'm thinking of setting up these games for wounded troops. Do you think your editors would support it? And everybody said, yeah, I think so.
So he was actually asking journalists for their opinion on how he should operate, or what kind of projects he should make.
Yeah. And of course, the British press did give a lot of support to that. In fact, I got a letter from the sort of organiser of the first Invictus Games thanking me personally for my support for that. At the same time, I can remember him getting really quite agitated on that trip about something he'd read in Heat magazine. And we were sort of, why are you worrying about what's in Heat magazine? They haven't got a royal correspondent. But he sort of saw the media just as one thing. And to him, there wasn't that much difference between a royal correspondent and somebody who'd never reported on him before. And he was also very worried about, I can remember him being worried about, the readers' comments underneath a news website's, not my current, that point website, but another newspaper company's website. And I don't think anybody could really understand why he was micromanaging things and why he was so agitated about things, because clearly there was a lot of nonsense said and written about him at times.
Well, there's a lot of news written about him at times. That's probably why they need a UK press officer.
There is, yes.
But the news, well, the last couple of things that have been happening with Harry that draw my attention is this visa issue. So there is this think tank in the USA that says we need to know what Harry said on his visa application, whether he admitted taking drugs, whether he got preferential treatment to actually come into the USA and have a visa because he's made all these confessions in spare. He could easily just, this is a court case now, but he could easily just, he could he could show his visa application. He could prove he isn't lying. What are your thoughts on what he's doing there?
Yeah, well, he clearly doesn't want to. He wants to maintain the confidentiality of that whole process, and I don't think it's really clear. Certainly not clear to me, on what basis he is living and working in the US at the moment. No. Does he have a green card? Does he? It's not clear, and the US government clearly doesn't want to disclose all those details either. I think it's a problem for him, but it also illustrates another problem for him, is that he and Meghan have become very divisive in the US as well as over here. Clearly they have their supporters over here as well. But in the US, it seems to be quite political. And although there are obviously exceptions to the rule, and I'm aware, I know people personally who are exceptions to this, but generally Democrats seem to be more sympathetic to him, and Republicans really don't seem to be keen on Harry and Meghan at all. And if Donald Trump gets back in this year, then that's another potential problem for him, because Trump doesn't seem very keen on Harry either.
He says a lot of things, Donald Trump. But he's made it very clear that he's not a fan, I think he said, of Harry and Meghan. You mentioned about divisive. It's really interesting that, I think with Harry and Meghan, their stock has gradually gone down the longer that they've been in America and the longer that they've actually given their side of the story. I think when they left, there was still a lot of sympathy for them. And I think that's gradually dwindled as we've heard their story and their opinion, and heard their struggles over time. One of the things that is going to rear its head also is Meghan's podcast, which we're led to believe has been delayed. So they kind of announced it earlier this year that she was going to do her Archetypes podcast, is moving to a very much smaller label from Spotify. That, with the visa and with these shows which don't exactly grab my they don't make me excited, the shows. No. Is it turning bad for Harry and Meghan? Is the dream gradually, sliding away, particularly with the podcast issue, that if she can't get it out this year, what on earth is going on?
I think so. I think they've struggled. I think, initially when they based themselves over there, it drove me nuts, I have to say, that the American media essentially took a line that, what have those racist Brits done to our American princess? I thought that was very unfair, because it was much more nuanced than that. And that, initially, of course, as so many people have pointed out, Meghan was treated as a breath of fresh air, and a fantastic addition to the family by the British media. But there's been a change. I think the US media has got bored with them continually moaning about the way they've been treated, and essentially has said, right, we've heard that story. We don't want to hear about that any longer. We want, if you are Americans, essentially, if you're basing yourself here, then you need to show us that you are enterprising people who are creating new lives for yourselves out here. What have you got to show us? And I think they've been beset by problems, really. They've sort of one step forward, two steps back all the time.